In today's video lecture, we will see English class 10th, and that will see grammar part, Unit 1 personality development, attitude is altitude. So we will see the grammar part. In today's grammar part, we will see what is defining clause and what is not defining relative clause. But before that, I would like to say what is a clause. So we know that a clause consists of a subject and a verb. That is, any sentence will have a subject and a verb, and that is called as clause. So when clause is used to say something about the noun, that is, if clause is used to say something about a person, place, animal or thing, then it is called as relative clause. Now let us see what are the types of clauses. There are two types of relative clauses: defining relative clause and non-defining relative clause, which you have in your syllabus. So I would like to say some basic points about defining relative clause and non-defining relative clause. Defining relative clause defines the noun. That is, it says what the type of noun is, what information the noun is giving. That is said by defining relative clause. Non-defining clause, it adds extra information to the noun. That is, in a non-defining relative clause, there are two parts of the question. One is the main part and the other one is an optional part. That is, even if optional part is not said, then also that sentence will give us some information. That is called as non-defining relative clause. So we can understand by the name non-defining relative clause that it gives us some extra information, and even if an optional part is skipped, then also we can get the information from that sentence. Then in both these defining relative clause and non-defining relative clause, they give us information about who, that, which. Here also who, that, which and whose are used. Now in case of defining relative clause, these are not separated by commas, whereas non-defining relative clauses are separated by commas and hyphens. As there are two parts of the question, in order to separate those two parts, we use commas or hyphens. So now let us see what is your textbook have to say about defining relative clause and non-defining relative clause. So here it is saying us to read some sentences. In the first sentence it is saying, the woman who taught surfing had been bitten by a shark. Observe this sentence. And in the second sentence it is saying, Nick who was teased and bullied had an electric wheelchair for mobility. So if you observe the sentence 1 and the sentence 2, we see in sentence 1 that the relative clause defines the woman. That is, here it is saying, if you observe closely, woman who taught him surfing had been bitten by a shark. That is, which woman had been bitten by a shark? The woman who taught him surfing had been bitten by a shark. That is, in the first sentence, the woman is defined, then that is called as a defining relative clause, as we saw just now. That is, when a sentence a part of the sentence which gives us information about the noun, that is called as defining relative clause. And in the sentence 2 you can see that the relative clause adds extra information about Nick. See, Nick who was teased and bullied had an electric wheelchair for mobility. So one part is who was teased and bullied, and the other part is Nick had an electric wheelchair for mobility. So even if we skip this part, who was teased and bullied, then also we will get an information that Nick had an electric wheelchair for mobility. That is, even if we ignore this, we will get to know that Nick had an electric wheelchair for mobility. Mobility means movement. So that is called as non-defining relative clause. And as you can observe here, that these who was teased and bullied is separated by commas here. That is, we will have commas after the noun, and after the main part of the sentence we will have a comma. Then after the optional part of the sentence we will have a comma. Then that is called as non-defining relative clause. So these were some of the properties of defining clause and non-defining relative clause. Now let us see some example. Here we can see that a non-defining relative clause is preceded and followed by a comma or a hyphen. Example, the brave 26-year-old hyphen who is mainly a torso plays football and golf, swims and surfs. So we can see that after the brave 26-year-old we have a hyphen. That is, what does the brave 26-year-old do? He plays torso, and then again we have hyphen plays football and golf, swims and surfs. So this is a non-defining relative clause. As we can see here we have hyphen, and also we can see that there are two parts to the question. So that is called as non-defining relative clause. Now the first exercise given to you in the textbook is that read the text again. That is, you have to read the lesson again, and then from that lesson you have to identify some more defining and non-defining relative clauses. Now you got to know, right, what are defining clauses and what are non-defining relative clauses. So with that help from the textbook, you have to alter some sentences and write that in terms of defining clauses and non-defining relative clauses. So here I took this example from page number 3 of your textbook. I call it my chicken drumstick, joked Nick, who was born in Melbourne, Australia, but now lives in Los Angeles. So here we can see that this sentence in the textbook, it is a non-defining relative clause. Why is it a non-defining relative clause? It is a non-defining NDR I am writing for non-defining relative clause. This first sentence is a non-defining relative clause because we can see here that they are separated by commas, and also that is Nick is calling it as drumstick. That is one part of the question. And then he is born in New York, Australia, and now he is living in Los Angeles. So here we can see that there are two parts of the question and we have commas and nothing is defined here. That is why it is called as non-defined relative clause. Now see the second example. Second, we can say from the textbook that Nick has a small foot on his left hip which helps him to balance him to kick. So here we can see that Nick is having a small foot on his left hip which helps him to balance him to quick. That is, what is helping Nick to balance him to quick? His small foot is helping him to balance him to kick. So we can see that which is related to small foot. As which is related to small foot, that is, small foot is giving us the information, and that is being related to which? About Nick. That is why it is a defining relative clause. Okay. Now see the third example. It is on page number 4. Second example was on page number 3 of your textbook. Third example is on page number 4. His mum invented a special plastic device that meant he could hold a pen and a pencil. So here also we can observe that his mum invented a special plastic device, comma, that meant, comma, he could hold a pen and pencil. So we can observe that what is helping him to hold, that is related to plastic device. What his mum did? His mum invented a special plastic device. So that is must to say. That is, whatever is must to say, then that type of sentences we know that they are defining a special plastic device is being defined by that. That is why it is a defining relative clause. Now see the fourth example. Nick's father, who was a computer programmer and accountant, taught Nick how to type. This is on page number 4. In your textbook, exact is not given. I have altered it so that it should be of the type of defining and non-defining relative clauses, because that is the part being asked in the exercise, right? So here, Nick's father, who was a computer programmer. So Nick's father, comma, who was a computer programmer and accountant, comma, taught Nick how to type. So even if the job of Nick's father is not said in the question, that will also be okay. That is, Nick's father taught Nick how to type. We can say like that also. But we are giving an extra information that Nick's father, who was a computer programmer and accountant, that extra information is given here. Non-defined relative clause. We know that a non-defined relative clause, extra information is given and two parts of the question are given. Now see the fifth example. It is on page number 5. Nick met surfing master Bethany Hamilton, who had her arm bitten off by a shark. So here also we can say that it is a defined relative clause, because who is given and whose arm had been bitten off by a shark? the surfing master's arm has been bitten off by a shark. That is, here we can observe it's very important to say whose arm was bitten by a shark, because if we don't give the information of whose arm was bitten by a shark, the sentence won't give us any important information. There is no value is given by the sentence if it is not said. So here who is related to surfing master. So this is also a defined relative clause. So in the first sentence we saw it as a non-defined relative clause. In the second sentence we saw it as a defining relative clause. And in third also it was a defining relative clause. And fifth is also defined relative clause. Whereas fourth one was non-defined relative clause, as it has commas and two parts of the question. And those are not exactly defining the clause. So exercise was about defined relative clause and non-defined relative clause. Now let us see the second part of your exercise of this relative clauses. So we can see here that complete the sentences with defining or non-defining relative clauses. Okay, so this is fill in the blanks. That is, either we should make it suitable such that it is defining relative clause, or we should make it suitable such that it is non-defining relative clause. So the first sentence is, this is the peaceful place dash. So what can it be? This is the peaceful place dash. This is the peaceful place where I always prefer to take rest. Here we can say that. So we can say it by defining relative clause. That is, only half part is given. It is a peaceful place, and I can complete it with where I always prefer to take rest. So I am not adding any extra information. I am just saying that it is a peaceful place where I always take rest. So where do I take rest? I take rest in a peaceful place. That is why it is a defined relative clause. Now second sentence is, the Mahaprastham is a popular book dash. So what can we apply? The Mahaprasthanam is a popular book which was written by Sri Rangam Srinivasa Rao. So we are saying here that which was written by, because we have to give information about the book. So it is a defining relative clause. Since we are defining who wrote the book. Now we are saying that it is a popular book also, and we are saying that who wrote that book. The next is, Suresh Dash has left the school just now. How can we fill it? Suresh, who won the gold medal in running race, has left the school just now. So we can see that Suresh, comma, who won the gold medal in running race, has left the school just now. That is, he has won the gold medal. Even if you don't write this, it is okay. Suresh has left the school just now, or we can say Suresh, who won the gold medal in running race, has left the school just now. Since we are saying about two parts, we have to put commas here, as it is a non-defined relative clause. The next question is this the street dash question mark? So we can say, is this the street which was declared as a containment zone? We are saying about street and containment zone. That is, which here is related to street and containment zone. So it is a defining relative clause. To the last question, here it is saying the express dash has just arrived. Here, as we have to say about the blank, the express dash has just arrived. So the express which I wanted to catch. We know that which, was, who, these are the words, that is, these are called as relative pronouns which are used to connect the nouns. So we know that relative pronouns are used to connect the nouns. So here we are using which. The express which I wanted to catch has just arrived. So since I can just say the express has just arrived, but since it is asking me blank, I am filling it with which I wanted to catch. And since I have the express which, means I should write a comma here and I should write a comma afterwards. So that is why it is a non-defined relative clause. So this is how we are filling defined relative clauses and non-defined relative clauses. Hope you have understood this video lecture. If you understood this video lecture, please like the video, share this video with your friends, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Thank you very much.